to Blue. My name is Mathieu Saulnier. You can also find me on Twitter at ScoobyMTL. Here's just a little bit about me. I specialize in adversary detection and threat hunting. I'm also a DEF CON Blue Team volunteer since last year at its creation. At this point of the talk, you might already wonder, is this guy mentally challenged or does he have an accent? Well, according to my doctor, it's because I'm French-Canadian and I speak like this. So you'll probably notice that I will or not pronounce H's in front of word and S's at the end of words, or I might add them where they don't belong. Don't worry. And Canadian, well, in general, we're nice people until we talk about hockey. So here's the agenda for today. So we're going to go over an overview of BloodHound, some basic usage of BloodHound. Then I'm going to go through an introduction of the Cypher query language. Then we're going to use that knowledge to destroy attack paths. And then we're going to talk about reporting and automation. By show of hands, except you two, who actually used BloodHound before? Okay, a lot of people. Who actually built their own Cypher query before? You did. Okay. Defenders think in list, attackers think in graph. As long as this is true, attackers wins. This is a very famous quote from John Lambert that you probably heard. It's also the title of one of his blog posts. So when an adversary lands in your network, it does not land in a list. It lands in a graph, which is a complex set of relationship between objects. BloodHound is one of the tools that can actually help you visualize the graph and turn the table in your favor as a defender. So what do we talk about when we talk about list? Well, this is a good example. A list of assets, a list of server names, a list of groups, a list of serial number, which is extremely useful in InfoSec. And when you dig down, you have more lists, a list of open ports, install software, compliancy box, so on and so forth. Well, what all of those lists won't tell you that a graph will is how are those things actually connected together? In other words, what are the relationships that exist that you know of, and especially that you do not know of, between all of your assets? What is a graph? Well, a graph is not a security concept per se. It can be used in everyday life, like in this example. So you and Alexis are in a restaurant. Comes along Taylor and Jordan. You become infatuated with Jordan, and you're gonna leverage a set of relationship in order to get what you want. So you're gonna leverage your family relationship with Alexis, which is a coworker of Taylor, which is a friend of Jordan. And with that, you're gonna find Jordan's phone number. Yay! And by the icon I used for that phone number, you can guess roughly how old I am. I also hope that you noticed and you appreciate that all the names and relationship are gender neutral. Put a lot of effort into that. Now in Active Directory, this is how it actually translates. An attacker will land on your network maybe by using spear phishing or password spraying or whatever. And from that user, he might have admin to his own laptop. Very bad InfoSec practice, but it does happen way more than we want to admit it. Then from that laptop, maybe that user can RDP to a terminal server, for example, and depending on the size of your organization, there might be hundreds, if not thousands of people connected to that machine. And one of these user who has a session has a little crown because it belongs to a group, a high value group such as domain admin. In this presentation, I'll use domain admin or high value group almost interchangeably, but bear in mind that there's more groups than just domain admins that are of high interest. Now we're gonna go over an overview of BloodHound. I might go a bit fast because almost everybody raised their hand. But what is BloodHound? BloodHound uses graph theory to reveal the hidden and often unintended relationship within Active Directory. And both defenders and attackers can use those attack paths, defenders to break them, and of course, attackers to exploit them. Here's a very quick history about BloodHound. It was released at DEF CON 24 in a call 6 Degree of Domain Admin. Here's the link to the presentation. If you haven't seen it, you will actually see Rowan unlock his password manager and put the repo live. I was personally introduced to BloodHound a year after that at Black Hat 2017 in a talk called the Industrial Revolution of Lateral Movement from Tal Mahar and Tal Berry, where they explain how you can export the JSON path and then use some PowerShell script in order to get the credential automatically. Last year at Black Hat 2018, the team released BloodHound 2.0 at Arsenal, and it is developed by Waldo, Captain Jesus, and Armjoy, who are in the room. And they all work for SpectreOps. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with those names. So what does BloodHound do exactly? Well, it does three very simple things. It queries Active Directory, it imports information in Neo4j backend database, and then it shows relationship between objects using a GUI. So why should you use BloodHound? Well, for Red Team, you can use the UI to build attack path offline, and this will reduce a lot the noise on the network. When you're querying the network, every time you jump on a box, if you need to rescan the network, you're going to do that a lot of time, especially in large network. And when you're running BloodHound, you'll touch the machine 2 times, if I'm not wrong. For blue teamers, well, we can use the query that, that I'll show you to find the paths that give attack paths or route to high-value targets to the most people in your organization. And then you can break those paths, and you can actually test the effect of a remediation directly in the graph before you go out and tell your sysadmin to do any modification. And that's what we're going to talk about. So now let's go over the basic, or what I like to call the first steps. So first of all, you'll need ingester. There's 3 main ingester for BloodHound. There's SharpHound, which is a C# executable. There's Invoke BloodHound, that is a PowerShell that loads SharpHound reflectively. And there is Python, BloodHound Python, which is obviously a Python script that you can run also on Linux. So if you land on a Linux box, you can get all the goodness from BloodHound from there. On the right side of the screen, you can see a few collection methods that you might find useful, or -C for short, all. But be careful that all does not include logged on, because in Windows 10th anniversary and Windows 2016 server, you need to be local admin in order to list the session. Then there's also the DC only setting that will do a lot less noise on the network. As Defender, we don't really care about the noise, but it's still good to run it in order to see if your detection will catch it if it does less noise. Then there's the max loop time. That goes end-to-end with the session loop. By default, BloodHound will run session for, we'll try to get the session for 2 hours. As Defender, you probably want to run it a lot longer, because if you run it 2 hours during the day, you'll catch all your user activity, but a lot of admin tasks are run only at night. So you can run it for 24 hours, 48 hours, and you should also shift when you're running it from time to time. Don't always run it Monday, Tuesday. Run it also sometimes on the weekend, because you might have some administrative tasks that runs only on weekends. Then there's Search Forest if you have multiple forests, and SharpHound-H, or you can go directly in the code to get all of the other switches. It has happened in the past that the help file was not exactly as the new comments. Just saying. Now it's time to go through a little demo or a tour of the GUI. And please, Andy and Rowan, don't slow down the group. If you have questions, wait until the end. We can do a one-on-one. Just mirror, so it's going to be, whoops, wrong screen. Okay. So this is the screen that you see when you logged in BloodHound. So on the right side, you have the domain admin groups, and on the left, you have all of your admins. If you click here, you get your database information, some node information, and some queries. Most people usually run the second query here, find shortest path to domain admin. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to query our database. And while the little doggy does this thing, we're going to continue our tour. Down below here are the custom queries. You can click on the little pen here in order to edit the query. I will give you a link with all of the query that you see down there that you can just paste there. And here it is. So from here, you can select any objects. It's going to bring the information about that node. If you right click, you have a few things that you can do. Mark as owned or edit the node. Here you'll see all the information about the node. You can also add some properties. Another interesting thing you can set as a starting node, and then you can use a little highway here in order to do just like in Google Maps. So from this user, do we have a path to domain admins, and it's autocomplete. It's great. And then you see the path from that user. Here, you can just come back to the previous view. So let's continue the tour. So here, you can export the graph, as we talked about, in JSON format or in an image. You saw it took a few minutes, but my database is very small. If you have a very large database, it can take a few hours to generate that graph. So you don't want to generate the graph every time you want to show it to someone in your organization. Here you can import your graph, change the layout, upload data. And here, settings, there's a few interesting things. Query debug mode, very important for us when you want to learn Cypher. It's going to show you the query that is run every time in the bar here, so you can cut and paste. And probably the most important part of BloodHound is the dark theme or the dark mode. By the way, every time I say dark mode in this presentation, there's a fairy that is born. Why fairy? Because I have 2 daughters and they love fairies. Okay, let's go over some things that are maybe less known in BloodHound. First of all, when you have an edge like this, you can right-click, get some help. So if you don't know how to abuse and execute DCOM link, you can go here in abuse information, and you're going to see actually what can be, how you can leverage that, some OPSEC configuration, and also some reference about this attack. You can use the control key in order to toggle on or off the labels. So depending with who you're sharing your graph or how busy the graph is, you might or not want to use that. There's the command control I that will bring the console. So if there's anything that the console wants to tell you or the backend database, that's where you're going to actually see things. And finally, yeah, here also you have, well, here you see that you have user. Little less known, you can also search for GPO using GPO colon. You can search for OU, and you can also search for domain that were queried. I told you to wait until the end, guys. This is not nice. Where was I? Where was, sorry. Yeah, so the GPO, Oh yeah, there's also another key stroke that you can use. It's the space bar. There. So it brings the spotlight. So this will show you all of the elements in your graph. And you can click on any graph. It's going to zoom in, and it's going to bring the node information. Another key that is not very well known, and I think it's the last key that I have to show you, is Command R. So that will log you out, refresh, log you back in, and then you'll have your new interface just reloaded. So this one. Okay, so let's continue. So as I mentioned, whoops. That's the first fairy of the talk. Just have a little problem with my, just a second. Jesus. Okay. Sorry about that. So here's the first fairy of the talk because we talked about the dark theme. Now some undocumented feature. I said they were undocumented, so I've documented them. So now they're half documented. So the graph database. So behind BloodHound, there's a Neo4j database, as I mentioned. You can download the community edition at that link, and you'll start that just like you would start any other Linux service using the start command. Then you can log into the web console using port 7474, and some of you might wonder why use the web console when you have a GUI. Well, there's a few reasons for that. Dude, I told you to wait until the end. Where's the keyboard? Where's the mouse? Jesus Christ. I'm Okay, there it is. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So yeah, graph database. So one of the reasons why to use the web UI instead of the console is that if you make a mistake, you'll know right away instead of the little doggy running forever. So here, for example, I put the equal sign instead of a semicolon, and the interface is telling me when I fix my query, I get the actual result. You can also return properties where that you cannot do in the graph user, in the GUI, in the BloodHound GUI. And also, well, the web console, as you can see, has a dark theme, which brings us our second fairy of the talk. Now that we've done the tour of the tool, we're going to go into Cypher, or what I like to call learning to run. So here's the basic about Cypher. First of all, you'll need a match statement to say what you want to actually get from your query. You'll need some objects. So here we're defining a variable you as a user. And if you want to access any properties of that object, you can use user.name. You'll also need some relationship, which is -- and a pointing arrow in the direction that you want. And if you want to specify the type of relationship, you can put it in bracket. Then you'll probably want to do some path finding. So here you can use shortest path or all shortest paths and specify the number of hops between two objects. Then you can use where to make filtering. Thank you. and then you can use return to return information that you want to see, if you want to return a path or if you want to return some properties. It's a bit too hot. If you bring me a cold one, I'll drink it. Filtering. There's two ways to do filter. You can use explicit method or you can use the where clause. So here's an example of the explicit one. So here we're looking for a group name that is exactly domain user at testlab.local, and a second group that we define as M, which is domain admin at testlab.local, and we want to find the shortest path between the first group and the second group and return the path. We can do that using a where clause, and here how you do that. So shortest path N group M group, where N name starts with domain user and M name contains domain ADM. When we run those two queries, or here are the queries side by side, sorry. When you run those queries, not surprisingly, they give the same result. So you might wonder why use one instead of the other. Well, first of all, there's the speed. It is a lot faster to use explicit versus a where clause. Bear in mind, again, my database is very small, so the speed difference is not huge, but in a larger database, you might see better result or bigger difference. It's better to use where clause if you have multiple domain, though, because you don't want to rewrite all your query, or if you're a consultant, you don't want to rewrite your query for every domain or engagement that you're doing. Using the web GUI, the web console, sorry, will also show you how you can improve your Cypher query. And when you can improve it, you'll see those little exclamation box beside the line. When you click on them, you'll get the information. And then you can actually change your query. So here you'll see the fixed query and the little exclamation points have disappeared. Here are the two queries side by side. So if you're looking at those queries, you'll see that the difference between them is that actually in the first one, we are declaring our variable and then doing the shortest path. Whereas in the second one, we're doing the shortest path and we're declaring our variable right inside that function, which is now the preferred way for Cypher to build your query. It's now time for pro tip number 1 of the talk, explain and profile. If you want to know how stressful your query are going to be against your database, you can append the word explain that will do the execution plan but will not run the statement, or the word profile, which actually will run the statement, and you'll see exactly which operator is taking most of the time. So here is just a query that touch every single objects in your database, just to show you a little bit how it works. So here we do explain match in the same query that we had before. And you can see up here that it says that it's going to touch 1,600 objects. When we run profile, we have similar graph, but you'll see here that the number that it actually touch is over 16,000 objects. Here are some useful queries that I like to run. And here is the link to the GitHub repo that I talked about. And the last slide of the deck is a link where you can download the whole deck. So you don't need really to take pictures of everything. So what I like to do when I go into a new organization is run some information about domain user. I like to see where domain user have local admin rights, if there's any path from domain user to high value target, if domain user can RDP to any system, and then I want to check all the other rights that actually domain user could have. After that, it's interesting to look at Kerber roasting. For those who have no idea what Kerber roasting is, it's an attack where you request a weak cipher of a password in RC4 and you crack it offline. If you want more information, you can go to adsecurity.org by Sean McAuliffe. You'll get all the information that you need. So you can easily target only the high value account first, or list all of the accounts, and those queries, as I said, are there. And I also brought back the top 10 that were in version 1, because I think that as a defender, they are a great place to start hunting in your environment and exploring what you have. When you get good with Cypher, you can do query that look like this. Those two queries were actually shared by Andy or Waldo in the BloodHound Slack channel, but just to show you how it can become complex. So here we have optional match. We're collecting variable, we're adding them, and then we're reading from them using unwend. We count things, we do distinct count. And in the second one, we're actually extracting properties. We're filtering out of them. We can do also some maths. You can see here average and length. So it can get pretty complex. If you want to learn more about Cypher, there's the Neo4j cheat sheet that you can go and use. So now that we know about Cypher, we're going to go and destroy some paths. So I'm just going to explain what we're trying to do exactly. So we're trying to find the busiest path that will give most of our user a path to a high-value target. Then we're going to test the effect of the remediation that we want to send to our domain admins, just to make sure that it actually kills the path, destroy the path for real. This way, our sysadmin won't work for nothing, and we won't have paths when they're done fixing the problem. So we're going to try that in a control environment first. So first of all, we're going to create a problem. So here's how you would create a link between two objects. You use the merge command between domain user and a computer that is named 673, and then you give admin rights from the group to the computer. When you run that, you'll get that one relation is created. Now it's time to test your relation. So here how you would test a relationship. So you do a match of a path between domain user and computer 673, and then you return P or your path. And not surprisingly, here's our admin path from domain user to computer 673. Now we have two options to filter out or to remove the link. First of all, we can filter it out. So this is useful when you have only one link, one edge of that type in the whole path, or you could delete the relationship, and this is useful if you have more than one type of relationship, and I'll show you an example. So now this is how you would do the filter out. So it's the same beginning of the query. We're going to match a path between domain user and computer 673, and we're going to filter out all relation. We're going to look at all the relationships where the relationship name is different from admin 2, and then we're going to return that path. If we want to delete the relationship, again, same beginning. So we're going to match a path between domain admin and computer 673, and then we're going to delete the relation. And then we need to print it, so we're just going to return the path. Here are the queries side by side. And again, not surprisingly, when you run that, you have no data. So it works. Or does it? So I realized a few days before the presentation that everything that I just said about this theory is actually wrong. So if everything is wrong, did you actually came here for nothing? I'll take you through my thought process and you'll understand. So let's test it against real data. So now we want to find our target. So we're going to do a shortest path between domain user and domain admin, and we're going to return that path. And here is our path. And at the top here, we have execute decom. And as you can see, or maybe not, I don't know if it's big enough for you, but there's no other execute decom in the path, so that should be a prime candidate for a filter out. So let's go and do that. So we're going to do a match shortest path from domain user to domain admin, where relationships are different from execute decom. If this mitigation works, we should not have a path anymore to domain admin. But we do. But now it's 9 ops away. So we didn't, removing the execute decom did not actually fix the problem. So we need to target another link. But why is filtering wrong then? Because it clearly kind of worked. Well, if you use all shortest paths instead of shortest path, you'll see that there was actually 2 paths that had 6 ops. But with the interface only showed 1. So here, down here, you have the execute decom that we filter out. But actually, there was another execute decom in the other shortest path that was also filtered out. And this is something that I realized when I was answering a question to someone on the BloodHound channel. He was saying, how can I filter out a relationship between 2 objects? And someone said, just go in the GUI and uncheck the filter that you don't want. And I say, no, this is wrong because it's going to filter that type of relationship everywhere in your database. So it's wrong. And I was very proud of my answer. And then the next morning I said, uh-oh, this is exactly what I'm doing, but with Cypher. So that's when I realized that I was actually wrong. So this is not a good method. Don't use filtering. It was a nice, it was very nice in theory, but don't use it. So what about deleting a relation? Because I said everything was wrong, right? So let's go again to our shortest path from domain user to domain admin. And now we have the label. And here is the execute decom is between the group IT4574 and computer 652. So let's target that relationship and let's delete it. So we're going to match a path between IT group 4574 and a computer name 652, and we're going to delete our relationship. Delete R. As you can see in the little brackets, there's an R. And then you get this. And then I was like, this. Because this was 36 hours before the presentation. And I was like, uh-oh, I'm going to talk in front of a lot of people, and it doesn't work. Fortunately enough, the solution was one Google search away. So here is the correct way of deleting a relationship. So you need to specify which type of relation that you want to delete, and then you delete only one relationship. Sorry, here it is. So now you see that we want to target a relationship that is actually named execute decom, and that will delete only one relationship. And then I was literally like this in my hotel room. So using that technique, you'll get from the filtering that had 9 ops to the picture on the right, which is actually the right one, and we only deleted one execute decom, and we still have the other one as a shortest path. So we still know that removing that execute decom did not fix the link, but at least we are not blind to a lot of paths that might be shorter. So here's a little bit what happens is that if you run the same query in the 2 different GUI, you'll see that in Neo4j console, you see all the links. And in BloodHound, you see only one link. And the reason is very simple, and I had a chat with Waldo about this, is that when you query the database, it actually returns only one link, and it's going to return the first one that it sees alphabetically. So if the most important link starts with a Z, you won't see it. If there's another link that starts with a lower letter. Well, this is something that you might want to consider. Also in the web console, for some reason, it also returned only one path, but it shows them all by some black voodoo magic. So let's recap a little bit what happened. First of all, a graph is like a map. So it's not because you close one street between 2 cities that you cannot reach that city. There's always another, well, most of the time there's another way to get there. BloodHound will show only one relationship, even if there's more than one. And it is possible to delete a specific relationship if you give it a name. Also, be careful. When you start deleting relationship, you need either to recreate them, or if you delete too much and you'll use track, you can re-import your old database and it's going to recreate it. So now that we've got the right solution, we can get back to what the presentation was about and go for pro tip number 2 of the talk.
Hey Scooby, will there be another fairy? Sub T.
Oh, that's lovely, Casey. I won't spoil it to you, but there might be another one. So here, by default, BloodHound only have 5 groups that are high value. In your environment, there might be more, or there are probably more. So here's a query that will actually show you all the groups that have admin in the name and that don't have the high value property set to true. So in this fake environment, here what we have Asia admin, Europe admin, and North America admin. You can use this query here, it's the same beginning, but then you can set the high value property of those groups to true, and now all of your important groups are high value. So it's going to change from the 5 default one to the 8 groups that are actually important in your environment. Pro tip number 3, it's nice that you have all the groups that are high value, but what about their members? So this query will query all the groups that have high value, and then set the high value of all of the user to true. I'm not sure why it's not done by default, but it's not. For those who have a good eye, you might have noticed that the relationship in this one is actually reverse. This is just, again, to show you how flexible Cypher can be. So it's going to change, visually, it's going to change your graph from this. This is domain admin and all the domain admins in the group, to this, where everyone has his little diamond, meaning that they're high value target. When you run this in your environment, what it's going to look like, if you run the all shortest paths to high value targets, it's going to get from this originally to this. So you can see that there's actually a lot more high value targets that exist in your environment than what was shown originally. Now it's time for pro tip number 4. And I know, it's not Christmas, but I keep on giving. So here is a way to improve some of your query, and this is a tool in the shell, as you can see, and we're going to come back to that tool later, but it's just to show you exactly how long it takes to run every query. So in the first one, you can see that it's slightly longer than the second one, and there's a very slight difference. In the first one, you are returning a path, and in the second one, you are returning a property. And it is a lot faster to return properties than it is to return path. So if you don't need the full path, just return the property that you are interested in. Again, my database is small. On a bigger database, it's going to make a bigger impact. Another pro tip to speed up the process is that you, and there's again a very subtle difference between those 2 queries, and it's right here. In the first one, we are defining a variable to our relationship, whereas in the second one, we do not. So if you do not plan to do anything with the relationship, you don't need to actually put a variable, and I see some people nodding. If you want to learn more about BloodHound and how to use it as a defender, there was a good talk by the SpectreOps crew called Operationalizing BloodHound Attack Graph for Defense. This is the link. Sad Processor also did some research. In the first link, he explained how he whitelist nodes using some properties. And in the second link, it's actually some Cypher queries and Cypher training specifically for BloodHound. There's also obviously the BloodHound Slack, especially the Cypher query channel, whereas lots of people are active and will help you build your queries. Now it's time to talk about reporting, because attackers think in graph, management thinks in metrics, and as long as this is true, ops will suffer. Thank you. I want to thank Sad Processor for being the originator of this. So here's an example of very basic reports that you could give your organization, and I've highlighted 2 of the query that we're going to go a little bit deeper. So first of all, the percentage of user with a path to domain admin. Let's say the first time you run this in January, you have 100%. Then you manage to get it down to 57 and maybe to 12%. If this is not graphical enough or visual enough, sorry, for your management, you can always use gauges. And if this is not visual enough, well, honestly, I cannot help you anymore. These ones have been made very, very easily with Google Docs. So here's the query that you can use to show the percentage of users who have a path to domain user. So this query goes, I'm going to try to explain it a little bit. So you're doing an optional match where you are looking for users that have a path to domain admin. Then you're doing another match where you're looking for the total of users, and you count them, you count the distinct number of users you have, and you put that in a variable that you call uTotal. And then you count also the distinct user that has a path, and then you do some maths right in your return function. So you say user that has a path divided by my total user multiplied by 100%, they will give me my percent. So here you have it, 100%, which is pretty normal because I've created the link for that. And now the second query that I want to show, and this one I'm also very proud of because I worked very, very hard. Waldo gave me a query that worked in production using SID, but it didn't work in my test database because there's no SID in the fake database. So I had to work kind of hard to make this one. So here I go. So you do an optional match for computer that are not in the domain controller group. So that will give you all your non-domain controller machine, and you can see it as non-DC. And then you're going to do a match from all of your computer that are not DC, and you're going to search for all the user that have a session on those machines that are member of the domain admin groups. And then you're going to return all the username, and you're going to count to how many machines they are connected to, and you're going to return that. Again, for those who have good eyes, you might have noticed that here we have double relationship, again, showing how powerful Cypher can be when you start playing with it and understand how it works. So this will give us something like this. So all the username and all the number of connection they have. So now you know who you can target in your organization to give some training and explain how it works. If you have more cryptic username and this doesn't mean anything to you, there's a little neat trick here. You'll see this is pretty much the same query that I've just shown. There's a slight difference, is that in the return function, we use brackets, and this way we can return more than one attributes. So that will return something that looks like this. So we have the username and then the display name from the database. Now, again, another way to be more visual maybe is to use logarithmic view or logarithmic bars. This is probably not the best way to show it, but it's difficult. Because like if you're looking especially for Kerber hosting, you'll have very large number, and for the rest you should have very small number. But I hope I get some points because I've used a dark theme. Oh, the third fairy of the talk. Now it's time to talk about automation, because let's be honest, we don't like to do things again and again and again. So here we're back in the shell, and there's this Cypher shell utility that is located in the bin directory. So you can export your username, export your password, and then you can paste your Cypher query right in the shell. So this query, for example, is actually, you're looking for high value curb roastable accounts that are member of high value groups. When you run that in the shell, this is what you get. Very nice graph. You can also pipe that into a CSV, and that will give you something like that. Someone asked me the other day why Q8. It's just because it's the 8th query in my graph. And then this, you can put in a CSV, and everybody can open a CSV, even your management. So you can easily pass them around. Now it's time to do some alerting. So oh yeah, I forgot a little pro tip. I'm just going to come back. As you can see here, we need to put the query in single quotes. So it's a good habit to use always double quotes when you're building your query, and use single quotes in the shell. Or the other way around, you can use single quotes everywhere, but don't mix and match single quotes and double quotes when dealing with strings, because otherwise it's going to make your automation extremely difficult. So alerting. So you want to build your query as you saw, and then you want to keep the result from the previous month, and you want to compare the result. And if the number increase, you probably want to generate a ticket to your SOC. If there's more curb roastable accounts in the high value group, you want to investigate why, you want to reach out to the owner of those groups and see if it's really mandatory that those users are in high-value groups. Yeah. Now it's time for the conclusion. So here are the key takeaways for the talk. With a tool like BloodHound, defenders can start thinking in graph too. Cypher, as I think I've demonstrated, is a very flexible and powerful language. It is also important to test the real impact of a remediation that you want to do in your database. This way, you're not going to talk with your admin, tell them, hey, delete this link or remove this group from, or remove that person from that group or remove these properties, and then you run it next month and you have the exact same number of users that have a path to domain admin. If you do that one time, it's maybe okay. If you do that a second time, a third time, your sysadmin will lose faith in BloodHound, they'll lose faith in the process, and more importantly, they might lose faith in you. So always test the effect. Also, not all queries are worth automating. For example, the first query that we saw was actually all the domain admins in all the users in the domain admin groups. And this is something that you should definitely monitor, but you're gonna run BloodHound maybe once a month, once a week if you're lucky. But you probably want to be informed right away in real time if there's a new domain admin in your enterprise. So you're way better using Windows Event ID 4728 instead of BloodHound for alerting for that. It's time for the thank yous. So I want to thank DerbyCon for allowing me to be here today. I want to thank Sean McAuliffe, Tal Berry, and Grifter for inspiring me to submit talks and come here today and talk to you publicly. And of course, I want to thank Waldo and Captain Jesus for the great work they've done to the community, all the support they're giving every day to everyone. So yeah, thank you. This is the link, as I promised, where you can download the whole deck. Do we have time for question? Do we have time for questions? Yeah. 7 minutes. So anyone has a question? Yes? It's honestly too warm. Seems like any other question? Okay. Okay, the question was, do I find a need to add stuff in the graph using merge? Usually, no. Usually, it's you import the data. Unless you delete a relationship and you want to recreate it, then you would use a merge. Any other questions? Yes? A pro tip for running the ingester? Well, I would suggest that you run it as a normal user first. Just to get it's easier to get the buy-in of your corporation if you run it as a normal user. And once you think you've reached a point where you cannot improve anymore, then you can ask to run it as a local admin on all machines, and then it's going to open new doors and new possibility. Any other questions? Yes. The question is, when do I think a domain is too large for BloodHound to handle? I don't have the questions, but you might ask these two guys right here. They might be able to answer. Yes? One last question, maybe, before everybody leaves.